Kept you waiting, huh?
You found a side quest!
If you've been following me for a while now, you know that 2D platformers are by far my favorite genre of video games. From how simple yet so fun the moveset can be, to how it works with the level design and gimmicks that developers create to make the most out of this moveset. But what's quite common with 2D platformers is how it's popular to have a simple story just to get the game going. From princesses being taken to a castle 8 worlds away, to an enemy invasion of your home. Heck, maybe the hero is just journeying to a new and mysterious land for whatever reason. Hello everyone, Alec Elger the SideQuest Gamer here, and I honestly believe that stories in simple platformer games, they can be a lot more grand in scope. They can be a lot bigger than what they would seem at face value. Let me explain. Now, not all platformers choose to have these simple story tropes common in platformers. Sometimes they go for something more thematically deep, like the Klonoa duology being a very notable outlier in this genre, since a lot of platformers don't outright kill off major characters and keep a serious tone. In fact, it's something I wouldn't have expected in a bright and colorful game like Klonoa until it happened. But because it did, and the 5th generation was really pushing for better stories in video games, it rightfully gained a cult following because of it. It may not be the first of its kind to do something thematically deep with its story, but it's definitely one of the platformer stories that comes to mind when I think of something thematically deep as opposed to something simple. From the many platformers I played, platformers just go for the usual tropes and do nothing more with them. It's usually bad guy takes precious thing away from you, get it back by traveling through X amount of worlds, and eventually beat the bad guy and get your thing back. Simple ending, roll the credits. In these platformer stories, no one ever has some deeper, meaningful backstory unless it's played for laughs or just locked away in an instructions manual that we may or may not have. Take for example, why is Sonic the Hedgehog fast? Who cares?
I do.
Shut up. Get out.
Or if there are motives with the characters, it's usually something kind of basic, like Dr. Robotnik wanting to take over the world by roboticizing it, or he wants the Chaos Emeralds to power some weapon to do the exact same thing. And in the case of Donkey Kong Country, why would King K. Rool want to steal Donkey Kong's banana horde if he's a reptile? I mean, he's a carnivore, so logically speaking, he wouldn't even be able to eat bananas. Are these golden bananas valuable? I don't know. But it's more meaningful to Donkey Kong because that's his food source, and it's clearly important to him if he had that very negative reaction in that cave underneath his house. But that kind of makes the story feel rather incomplete. I mean, it's clearly important to Donkey Kong, but we still don't know what King K. Rool wants to do with this banana horde. Is it to starve DK? If that's the case, then why does he hate DK? It's never really explained in game. The thing about this game's story is that there's nothing to make it feel like a personal journey. There's not always anything that makes it emotionally deep or makes the player relate to the character. I mean, in DKC1, we get that the bananas are important to DK, that's well established, but is it something you think about days after playing the game and beating it, like you would with the death of an important character in Klonoa? Would you try to get your friends to play Donkey Kong Country because it has a dramatic story about, Donkey Kong's bananas getting stolen? But sometimes a platformer game can have the usual tropes, but do something a little more with them without realizing it. Like take for example Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, a later entry in the same series. It's been a game I've been playing on and off last year, and it's probably one of my favorite platformers of all time. I mean, it's far from the first of its kind to do something simple, but at the same time meaningful with its story presentation. At face value, DK and his friends are celebrating perhaps DK's birthday, until a multi-species covenant known as the Snowmads take over DK Island and get this, summon an ice dragon to freeze the island, which sends DK and company 6 islands away. I mean, sure, that's convenient for gameplay purposes, but just watching the Snowmads slam their ship on top of DK Island like they're claiming it, while DK is sent crashing into a wrecked plane already gives us enough explanation without words. DK lost his beloved island on his birthday, of all days, and the gang now must take on the Snowman army on each island. With all this playing out in-game, it really does feel somewhat personal, even if it is mostly played for laughs. I mean, cartoon violence tends to desensitize the player, but I'm not really questioning its logic, and as an added bonus, the summoning of the Ice Dragon makes these enemies feel somewhat of a big threat. We actually see them do something that's really threatening to the characters. As opposed to the first Donkey Kong Country, where we only get one simple cutscene, and the GBA remake goes a little further with this, but not really far enough by having those manly man Kremlings stuff Diddy into a barrel. I mean, the latter is funny, don't get me wrong, but it's a minor inconvenience without much consequence. At least with Donkey Kong 64, sure it's in 3D, but the threat of DK Isle being destroyed by King K. Rool's laser, that's a lot more intimidating than what we got in DKC 1. Say what you will about that game, but that story presentation was a lot more effective there, even if it is pretty simple. But this is where Tropical Freeze is different from DKC 1. What if you do return to DK Isle? Would you have to face that massive ice dragon in a boss battle? You can't really go home again because the enemies had a massive effect on that island, freezing it over. Little touches like that just add some excitement for the player for when they're about to approach the final worlds. But cutscenes aren't all that make a platformer story. Believe it or not, I find that level design can function as a world building device. I mean, it's kind of a given, but it's not really as talked about as I would like it to be. Like take for example the Snowmads. We see them patrolling all 6 islands with them getting more and more powerful as you progress. But what do we see them use? We see fortifications and platforms made entirely of wood. We see weapons like bombs made out of some type of fruit. We even see many places have things that look like the Snowmads built it themselves or are reaping the benefits of the island they're on. We see what they've done to other islands, and just knowing these kind of changes will happen to DK Isle kind of adds some weight to the plot and how intimidating these Snowmads can be despite being cartoonish villains. Each level is atmospheric and the music really helps convey the emotions meant to be felt in these levels, like how epic and desolate Scorch and Torch sounds. I mean, it has the usual percussion appropriate for Donkey Kong games, but it adds in a keyboard building up to the pan flute part that just finishes off the piece before looping. It sounds great when seeing the African-style landscape being burned down, with patrols of snowmans walking around. It just really makes you feel something. Another example being the slower, more melancholy melody in Seashore War that plays as you see what happened to the beach landscape of DKL, frozen over with hordes of enemies marching about. This just makes me feel like Taylor from Planet of the Apes, seeing what was once home now fall victim to a negative change. And the instruments used, specifically the acoustic guitar and the choir VST, it just accompanies this feeling perfectly. Music, I feel, is a very important tool to contextualize the story a bit more. It can make a dangerous situation feel more dire, and a war-torn environment even more hopeless. It can even be upbeat and happy for when the status quo is restored, like in the inevitable ending of the players getting back what was taken from them. In combination with the designs of the environment, the graphics, and the music of the games like Tropical Freeze, it especially just forms a perfect harmony of atmosphere, making it feel like an experience in addition to being a game about going from point A to point B. Platformer fans generally are there for the gameplay, but even if the story is simple so it doesn't get in the way of those only in it for the gameplay, it can be a lot more than just platforming. It can evolve its simplistic story structure to be worth more to the player. And Tropical Freeze is just only one example of how a simple story can be a lot more than the sum of its parts. It doesn't even have to be entirely original in order to be great. It just has to give you all the things you would want out of a platformer story, but also things you didn't know you wanted until you experienced it firsthand and would not really notice until repeat playthroughs. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, CD, and Mania told simple but very entertaining stories through short pantomime cutscenes explaining why Sonic is on the adventure he's on, with the ending changing depending on whether Time Stone/Chaos Emeralds were collected or not. What makes these entertaining is that there is a small victory in not getting the item that really incentivizes you to play it again, giving the player a sense of loss and the drive to get a more satisfying victory from getting all the Chaos Emeralds. In Donkey Kong Country 2, it was kind of a gender-swapped damsel in distress story, with the heroes reading a letter about how DK is being held ransom in exchange for the banana horde you took back last time. It's interesting ascending to the top of that aisle, and even seeing DK tied up by the cruel King K. Rool. Ah, that's not a redundant sentence. Basically, whether it be through visuals, level design, or even music, the story has to feel like the events that are happening matters, especially to the characters, whether they grunt, don't talk, or have a lot of dialogue written for them, because while it's not the end of the world if a story in a platformer sucks, it can't prevent it from reaching its true potential. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome.